Hello and welcome to Mindset Mondays with DTK. This is episode 71 in an ongoing series, really created for folk who have a growth mindset or those who'd like to develop it. It's a chance to play with new ideas, new concepts, and try on new mindsets. So, wow, here's the playground we have today. And while I bring up the quote, if you'll take a moment to click share just underneath the video, and invite your friends and colleagues and community to this conversation. So today's quote, this is going back to Voltaire, who's used a couple of quotes of Voltaire's throughout this series. No problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. This gets back to that idea both of being intentional and sustained effort. It feels like a really strong intersection between the two. It's almost like, okay, so want to play with this a little bit. Nothing is impossible. Um, it merely takes investing enough of three core currencies, right? The idea of investing time, investing energy, and investing thought, right? So that idea of sustained thinking, it's really speaks directly to the investment of both time and thought. And God, that takes a ton of energy. We live in a stimulation-saturated world. So the energy required to dedicate sustained thinking, both time and thought. There's time, energy, thought. Time must be carved out, right? And effort must be dedicated. Energy must be reserved for and committed to the work. And that's why Voltaire's capture is so elegantly simple. Would that I spoke French, I would have looked it up and shared it with you, the original French. Um, left to the whims and winds of our stimulation-saturated world, it's way too easy to give short shrift to the problems that we face or the challenges that we face, even the concepts that we want to turn over and deal with and expand. So that's why those are still issues for us. So I'm curious how this is landing for you already. I see Emily Gale is speaking about a session that we had with Michael Bungay-Stanier, who's one of the thought leaders in the coaching space. Said she just listened to Michael's coaching session from last winter and suggest asking the problem, and what else? Even before the end, what else? Emily Gale, I probably pulled that up too soon. I want to step back a little bit because I think the first step to addressing any problem with the assault of sustained thinking is getting clear first on what the actual problem is. I think there are two issues at play. One is the not giving any given problem enough sustained thinking to address it. And I think the problem that precedes that is that we're often going off half-cocked. I speak from personal experience and then looking across a client base of the last 12 years and even 15 years in technology before that. Too often we go off half-cocked trying to address what we think the problem is, when in fact we're dealing with the presenting issues and not the underlying issues. And so the first thing that deserves our sustained thinking, that assault of sustained thinking, is getting clear about what the problem is. Right? It starts with observing the situation. And the thinking is pushed to determining what will be useful. I mean, what the actual problem is, what the cause is, what the underlying components are. In coaching, the issue that's brought by the client is the presenting issue is very rarely the real issue that they want addressed. How often is it the case that the problem that we're trying to solve is not the underlying problem, but just the surface presentation? Back with digital positions, our clients wanted more autonomy. And we spent a great deal of time, effort, and energy trying to solve that problem. And we built this very complex content management system for our clients, thinking that what they were asking for was autonomy. And it turns out that wasn't the presenting issue. And after years of building the system and selling the system and rolling it out to clients and using it with clients, and it was as successful as it was, despite our best efforts, because we weren't solving the real problem. What our clients wanted more than anything looked like autonomy. That's what they were asking for. What they wanted was understanding. They wanted to understand how internet initiatives serve the broader corporate initiatives, how what they were working on from the marketing in marketing flowed into everything else within the organization. What they wanted to understand was how the technology served, not how it worked. What they knew to ask for was being able to handle more things themselves. What they wanted was to understand what the issues were that they were building towards. And it's a much longer conversation, but we solved the presenting issue, and it was a short-lived solution. And we had a disproportionate amount of money, effort, and energy put into this solution when it wasn't solving the real problem. And I wonder how often we're still doing things like that, where we don't dig long enough to what the real issue is. We deal with the presenting issue instead. And so when we're determining what would be useful and looking at what our obstacles would be and thinking about and coming up with a plan, are we solving for what's not really the problem that needs to be solved? Challenge is, as humans, we're wired for constant thought. 60,000 individual thoughts every day. 60,000 in 24 hours. That's mind-boggling. How do we separate signal from noise? How do we focus on what's important and not just the volume? We're filtering constantly. And we have to filter even more. We have to dedicate that time and space and energy to channel our thoughts and focus them down to what's important. And it starts with figuring out what the problem actually is. That upon which you focus expands. Wow. So we focus our attention on the problem until we understand it, and then shift our attention to solving that problem. If we stay fixated on the problem too long, take it from somebody who's ADD, we focus on the problem too long, that ends up becoming overwhelming because we start catastrophizing forward. So there's that balance. How do you know where the tipping point is? To tip from focusing on the problem until you're clear enough of what it is, to then focus on the solution. Love input on that, right? Oh, great point from Charlotte. Charlotte, nice to see you. Great point from Charlotte that 90% of those thoughts that we roll through all day are the same thoughts, that which we are fixating on, the same things that roll around in our head. So what is our default thinking? How much of our thinking is just default? How much of it is listening to noise rather than directing our own thought? Yeah, what I'm thinking about is large chunks of time over long stretches with dedicated intentional thinking. That's the note that I made for myself. And what comes up is, it's about blocking your time. It's about owning your calendar. There's a comment that my clients hear me say all the time is, your calendar doesn't lie. If it's not on your calendar, it's not important. If you're not creating time chunks for sustained thinking, how can you possibly solve the problems you choose to address? Go back to, no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. Where does sustained thinking show up on your calendar? Where does dedicated time, a space for you to put your time, effort, and energy onto solving the problems you choose to solve, where does that show up on your calendar? Where do you create the space for addressing these? Your calendar doesn't lie. I had a coach say this to me, years ago. If it were important to you, it'd be on your calendar. Where does closing down the office for the day show up on your calendar? Where does creating time to make dinner show up on your calendar? Where does meditation show up on your calendar? Where does exercise show up on your calendar? Where does? Constantly asking, if it's important, it's on your calendar. So I realized that this episode really was starting out talking about the what it takes to create the time and space and energy to carve out the container for sustained thought so you can address the problems that you choose to address. Doesn't it really always come down to intentionality? Where are you carving out the time for sustained thought? Everything in mindset comes down to intentionality. Intentionally choosing your mindset, intentionally owning your time, intentionally reserving energy and being intentional about where you commit your energy. So, although the question associated with this quote, what deserves your sustained thought? I'm curious about where are you creating a container for sustained thought? What are you making more important than carving out a container for sustained thought? How often do we hold on to the problems that we encounter, right? Just because they're comfortable and familiar. How often do we hold on to that which is familiar in place of doing the work to shift it? My God, I do it all the time. Right? We'd rather stick with the devil we know. New level, new devil. So we hold on to the problem by giving it short shrift. So the opportunity for you this week between now and next Monday is to carve out time for what is important to you, to create a container for that dedicated thinking, that sustained thinking. Because if no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking, then we need only carve out in our world the time and the space for that sustained thought to solve the problems that we choose to face. So between now and next Monday, what mindset will you choose?